Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the ninth and final round of the Qatar Masters Open being held here in Doha. Now, going to this final round, we've been following Magnus Carlsen, the five-time former world champion, in all of his games very closely. Today, Magnus finishes his tournament with another Indian. I believe this is his seventh Indian out of 9 games, and he has struggled mightily against them, drawing against Pranesh and losing to Karthikeyan. Now, today he's playing as Pernik, another Indian, and let's jump right into the action. So the game starts with e4. We got e5 from Magnus, knight to f3. We get knight to c6, and now bishop b5 is played here, and we have the classic Ruy Lopez. Now, a little bit surprised that Magnus is trying to be solid, but I think after the other day when he played that modern against Pranesh, and he almost lost that game, he decided he's going to try to play his positional style and try to make it work. So we get a6, bishop a4, and now we have the move b5 being played, bishop b3, and now Magnus plays this move knight to a5. Now this is a very provocative approach because Magnus is trying to go after this bishop on b3 right away, but in return he is potentially hanging the pawn on e5 and also undeveloping his pieces here. His knight, actually not undeveloping, they are underdeveloped, I should say. But in this position, Magnus has pushed nothing but p and moved his knight twice and to the rim at that. But Magnus's hope here is to trade the knight for the bishop. Now, in a lot of Ruy Lopez positions, Black will play something like d6 first to guard the pawn on e5 with the idea of knight to a5, but then White can play c3, so on knight a5, there's always bishop c2, or even a3 to retreat to a2. Either way, you have both of these pawn pushes to c3 or a3 to save the bishop on b3. So, in this position, Magnus plays knight a5. We get d4, which is considered to be the best move here. We get pawn takes pawn and queen takes pawn. Now, you'll notice again that White has developed the knight, the queen, and this bishop. Black has only developed one knight, all the while pushing his pawns like a potser. So, Magnus plays bishop b7 here, and we get this move knight to c3, d6, and now this very aggressive move bishop g5. Magnus goes knight e7, and now we get knight to d5, and here Magnus plays this very strange move, rook to g8. Now, Magnus has already played a dubious opening, and his opponent so far is playing a perfect game, but now Magnus really tries to muddy the waters with a strange rook g8 move. Now, the reason Magnus plays rook g8 is if he were to play a move like c6, White can simply trade the bishop on e7, and after takes, you take this free pawn on g7, and you attack the rook in the corner. So, Magnus plays rook g8, intending to take with the bishop, and the rook guards the pawn on g7. And here we get a mistake from Pranik with the move c4. Now, it's still a very good move. It's very explosive, obviously. But computer says that after this move castles, White is doing very, very well. Or I thought it said White is doing very well. Because after c5 here to attack the queen, White can sack the knight with knight to f6 here. And after g takes f7, or g takes f6, White can sack the bishop on f7, and after king f7, queen f6, king e8, and rook takes d6, let's say Black plays a move like queen c8, you have knight to e5, threatening checkmate in 1 with queen f7, and after rook g7 here, White can go bishop h6, and Black is losing everything here. This is a game that would have been very reminiscent of the famous games played by the former world chess champion, Michael Tal. Nonetheless, Pranik does not see it here. Now, this is one of the things that's also very important. When you play open tournaments against lower rated players, sometimes you have to judge the risk reward and whether you think your opponents can sack the house or whether they will try to be a little bit more positional and maybe you can get away with some inaccuracies. So here we get c4. We have f6 being played by Magnus here. Now Magnus is not worried about opening up the diagonal because he will always trade the knight on a5 for the bishop on b3. We get bishop to d2, and now c5 is played. We have queen c3 here. Slight inaccuracy as well. Computer wants queen to e3, so if Black ever trades knights on d5, White has potentially some play on the e file. So we get queen c3, knight takes c4 is played, bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, and now we have castles being played. Now, dust is somewhat settled here. We're almost out of the opening phase of the game, and Magnus is still lacking severely in development. He has this rook on g8, bishop f8, king 8, queen d8, rook on a8. All these pieces are on the back row. Meanwhile, White has castled the queen. You can bring the rooks to the center of the board, and it's looking very, very dire. So we get knight takes d5, e takes d5. Now Magnus plays king f7 here. He's trying to get his king out of the center, and he's trusting with these pawns on f6 and d6. White will not be able to jump with the knight and attack the king. Here we get queen takes c4, queen to d7, g4 played here. Now g4 is maybe not a bad move per se, but it's not best. What I think Pranik was concerned about is he's worried that down the road after rook e1, Black would be able to put this queen on f5 here, targeting the pawn on d5, as well as maybe the knight on f3. Say you get bishop c3, Black can go g5 or even g6 here potentially. And it feels like Black has some play. So Pronic plays g4 to stop queen f5, but also maybe push g5 and try to weaken the pawns around black's king. No. No. Well, that was great, you guys. My recording gets interrupted, obviously by housekeeping coming. Nonetheless, let's keep rolling with the flow. So after g4, we now get the move rook to e8 being played by Magnus. We have the move bishop c3 here played by Pronic with the idea of maybe queen f4, maybe g5, or rook he1. Now we have h5 played by Magnus, and here Pronic finally blunders after playing a pretty good game up to this point. He plays the move rook g1. Now the reason rook g1 is a bad move is that now after g5 is played, eventually black is going to ruin your pawn structure here on the king side. Now, in this position, h3 is a much more logical approach here because if black trades, you keep this pawn on g4, it restricts queen f5, you still have queen f4 ideas, and also you have the open h-file. But once you play this move rook g1 and g5 occurs, now your pawn structure is a little bit weak here. Black can also go rook h8 and use the h-file as well. Additionally, the black king very, very safe here with these pawns. The king can't really be attacked very easily. So we get g takes h5, which is a blunder here. What white probably should have done is played something like h3 or maybe even queen d3. But nonetheless, the position's starting to get a little bit out of control. Let's say h3 takes is played, for example, here. Black can go queen b5 to trade the queens off. And after b3, let's just say takes, for example. Bishop c8. White is significantly worse here because black wants to go rook e4, creating the classic kebab, and there will be all sorts of weaknesses. And in the long term, the two Bs are going to win the game for black. So we get the move g takes h5 played here by Pronic. We now, after g takes h5, have queen f5 being played, rook to d3 played here. Now, again, Pronic using time, getting a little bit down on the clock here. You can sort of start to feel that the position is slipping away as well, because even though white is temporarily up a pawn, you have the two bishops, the king is very safe, the pawn on d5 is weak, f3, f2 are weak. Black can even go after the pawns on the h-file, so it feels like the game is slipping away. So we get rook d3 here, a move which guards knight and the pawn at the same time, and you try to create the right triangle. Here we have g4 played by Magnus, and now he intends to activate the dark square bishop on this h6 diagonal. We get knight to d2, bishop to h6 played, we have king to d1, and now Magnus Carlsen has been able to turn the tables completely, and he should go on to win the game after king d1. So, Magnus plays bishop takes knight. Maybe not the best move, but still pretty good. We got bishop takes. We have rook to e5 played here by Magnus, trying to go after this pawn on d5 here, and maybe double stack the rooks on the e-file. When you combine that with the weak white king position on d1, white is in some serious trouble, and of course, the time situation is not favorable either. So we get queen b3 here from Pronic, and now Magnus plays bishop to a8, which is not best. He should have simply taken the pawn on d5. Probably Magnus saw the boogeyman here, where after rook takes, he probably thought there was some queen b7, king e6, rook e1 idea, because here there's a trick with queen b3, queen b6, and the game ends in a draw. But in this position, after queen b7, black can simply go for the quiet king f8 here. The bishop is pinned, so you cannot go check here. The rook on d5 stops that. And after you play, say, rook e1 here, after queen b1 check, king e2, queen d3, king d1, queen takes d2, it's GG, why not? So Magnus sees the boogeyman. Now, obviously, Magnus played a lot of Indians. They just keep coming for him game after game after game. And so he plays bishop a8. Here we get rook g3. Magnus plays rook e8. Again, not the best move, but very logical to stack the rooks on the open e-file. We have queen to a4. Rook to e4 is played, and now we get queen a6, bishop takes d5, queen takes d6, and here Magnus plays this horrible move, bishop to c4, and ruins everything. In this position, if Magnus played rook to d4 here, after takes, white is still in a lot of trouble here. You have ideas like queen to b1 check, you have bishop to f3 check as well, and white's king is very, very uncomfortable on this d1 square. Computer doesn't say that it's winning. It gives queen g7, king g8, and maybe queen f4, and you're still kind of saving the game. But it looks so incredibly scary with queen b1 and bishop f3 here that I think that if Magnus had played rook d4, he would have won within the next 5 moves due to the time situation. So we get bishop c4, and now Pronic plays queen d7, trading off the queens here. And now it is Magnus who is in a world of hurt here after we get the trade, king e6 and rook g7, because now white is actually ahead by 1 pawn, or 2 pawns, I should say. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, and white can start pushing p on the h-file. So Magnus plays rook d8, we get king c1, rook d4, rook 7 takes g4. Great move here. Rook d2, rook takes c4. Now, apparently in this position, computer says rook e3 is a little bit better here because the king has to go to the f file as opposed to being able to get over towards the c file and the b and a files as well. So we get rook c4, rook f2, rook e3, king d5, rook h4 played here by Pronic. Apparently a blunder, but a very logical move here as you intend to just push this p on the h file down the board and win the game. Magnus plays king c6, we get a3, rook to g8 is played, rook g3, and now we get rook to e8, king b1, and here Magnus plays the surprising move, rook to b8. Now I think at this point in the game, Magnus had many ways to save and make a draw, but Magnus still is trying to play what we call hope chess. He's hoping for a mistake from his opponent where maybe he can pull off a swindle, win this game, and avoid losing a lot of rating points. So we get rook b8, b4, takes, and now Magnus blunders horribly with this move, rook to e8. In this position, if Magnus had played king to b5 first, this is very close to a draw potentially, because if white plays h6, you have either rook to d8 or rook to e8, and there are a lot of ideas with checkmates on the back rank here. You also can stack on the 7th rank as well with like rook d2. So because of these ideas, black should save the game. So Magnus plays rook e8 instead. We get rook c3, king b5, and now we have rook c2. Actually, just to point out one thing as well, I think in this line after king b5 here, white maybe still could have played rook c3, rook c2 as well to keep great winning chances alive. So we get rook e8, check, king b5, rook c2, rook f3, and here Pronic blunders, or not blunders, I'm sorry, plays h6, we get king a4, and here Pronic blunders horribly with the move king c1. In this position, all that Pronic had to do was play this move king to b2, stopping the black king from entering, and he would have won this game and defeated Magnus Carlsen. The reason for it is very simple. If black were to play a move like rook to e1 here, if you go h7, there's check, 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 and it's a draw by repetition here. Black just repeats. But in this position here, you can play b5, checking the king on a4. After takes h7, there are no longer any ideas of checking the white king. You're pushing the p, you're going to win the game. So, after king b2, white is close to winning. I don't know exactly why Pronic plays. Probably saw rook b3, king c1 check, king d2, and maybe thought there was some rook e3 idea. But again, here, there's no boogeyman. You just go b5. And after king to b3, which is an obvious move, trying to create a checkmate idea here, white can play rook c3 check, takes, and again, with this h-pawn, white simply wins the game. Unfortunately, Pronic does not play that. Now, one other line that you're probably wondering, is it playable? Is this move h7 here? But h7 actually allows black to draw the game because there's rook e1 check. Again, the king up will allow the same idea of check, check, check. And after rook c1, black can play rook to e2 here. And now if you make a queen, even though white has an extra queen, black makes a repetition again with the same check, 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 check in the corner, and the game ends in a draw. So, king b2 would have won the game, but Pronic instead plays king c1. Now, it's a very hard move to understand why he played this, because all it does is invite black to use the active king, and Magnus keeps moving forward with his king, and now he plays king b3. Here we get rook b2, king c3, check, king b3. Pronic tries to keep the game alive and tries to win with this move, rook to d4. But now Magnus goes rook to a8, and now this king on b3 is a huge asset for black. It's targeting the rook. You can maybe create checkmate ideas, and both of these rooks on a8 and f3 are super, super active. So we get king d1, rook h3 played, b5 played here. Now Magnus goes rook a1. We get the block trade. Rook takes h2, and now it's very clear that the game is going to end in a draw, with both sides having one pawn left on the board. You get rook d6, takes, b6. Magnus plays rook h8, rook f6, king c4, king d2, rook to b8, and the game ends in a draw here because after king to c2, king b5, king c3, black will take. All the pieces come off the board, and with lone kings on the board, neither side can win. So Magnus is a very interesting game. Who's probably worse out of the opening, able to turn the tables around in typical Magnus fashion, and he probably should have won this game. But then he blunders uncharacteristically back, and Pronic has great chance to win. And for Pronic, it's a huge tragedy that he did not play that king b2 move, because he would have won the game. So, Magnus draws the game against another low-rated player. He loses another 3 to 4 rating points. His rating, I believe, is now down to something like 28, 25, if I'm not mistaken. A very, very tough tournament for Magnus. He loses, I want to say, 15 points-ish. Maybe not 15, maybe it's like 12 or 13. But very, very poor result, well below his standard. And we'll see whether this makes Magnus more motivated to come back and play better classical chess, or whether he sticks mostly to his word and he focuses on rapid and blitz and online and everything that is not classical chess going forward. So, Magnus draws, finishes in the middle of the pack. Now we will take a look at my game today. Now, going into the final round, I'm a half point out of first place. I'm half point behind Arjun Erigaisi, and I'm playing against Narayanan, who was leading for most of this tournament with the black pieces. So, Narayanan's a player I played a lot online. Very, very strong player. He plays under the account Indian Lad on chess.com. I have a lot of respect for him, so I know it's going to be a tough fight. So we get d4. I play knight f6, c4. Now I play e6. knight f3, b6, classic Queen's Indian. Same opening that I had yesterday with the colors reversed against Buddy Pranat. Here we get g3, bishop b7, bishop g2. I check, bishop d2, swap, castles, castles, and I play d6. Now, this is a system I played online against Magnus Carlsen. I also played it in the FIDE World Cup in late August in Baku, Azerbaijan. Of course, those of you guys who saw the recap against Ventikesh, the first round opponent, are familiar with this position. Now, you're probably wondering, well, you're half point behind Arjun. Why don't you play something more aggressive? Now, the main problem is that with the black pieces, it's very tricky. You have to take serious liberties and potentially get very bad, if not losing positions, when you try to play like that, i.e. Magnus Carlsen's games. And I figured that even though I have other ways to win the tournament, ultimately the biggest goal is to try and qualify for the Canada. So if I draw this game, it's not the end of the world. I'll lose a couple of rating points, but I'll still be very much in the hunt, and I keep all my chances alive in the Isle of Man. But if I lose this game, I kill my rating. I also kill my chances of qualifying by that venue, and it means I'm going to have to play like a total madman in the Isle of Man. So that's why I chose to be solid. So we get rook d1, knight d7, now queen c2, bishop e4, queen c1, bishop b7. And here my opponent had the option to play queen c2, forcing a repetition and drawing the game very quickly. Instead, he plays queen to f4, and now I play d5 here. He goes knight e5, and now I play the strange move c6. Now, knight h5 was my initial idea, but then I decided to actually not play it. Knight h5, queen to e3, for example, knight f6, knight c3. And after, say, a move like a5 or even d5 here, black should be okay. But instead, I play d5, we get knight e5, and now I play c6. Not the best move, but the reason I played it was for a specific concept, which is that after knight c3, my idea was to play this move queen b8, pressuring the knight on e5 and the queen on f4. Now, ultimately, I saw this idea, and then I thought after, not e4, what did I see here? Ultimately, I thought in this position, after, say, a move like rook a c1, it feels a little bit cramped. White is intending to play e4 down the road, and I just don't like my position very much. So I decided to start thinking here, and I saw another move that piqued my interest. And that move is what I played in the game with rook c8. Now, while I was thinking on this move rook c8, there were two lines that I was considering. First was c takes d5. So I take with the pawn here after knight to b5. These knights on e5 and d6 are very, very active, and it feels very uncomfortable here. So I was intending to play knight takes d5, and I thought after queen d2, I could maybe just go knight f6, maybe trade some knights here and play like queen c7. I thought it was a little bit worse, but I didn't think it was that bad. So I'm happy then with c takes d5. So then I thought, well, maybe white will go rook c1, try to put pressure on the c file. But after rook c1 and bishop to a6, I simply felt that I should be completely fine in this position. Now, white does still have a small advantage, but it's not anything critical. So that was the extent of my calculations. Now, as soon as I played rook c8, Narayanan thought for about, I want to say like 2 minutes or 3 minutes, whatever it was, and he very quickly played this move e4, which I had not calculated. Now, as soon as Narayanan played e4, I was very, very angry with myself because now I am in some serious, serious trouble here. And the options I have, and I did think for 30 minutes here, none of them are very attractive. Now, what I probably should have done was simply traded down on e4, knight f6, bishop g2, and something like queen e7. But in this position, after, say, a move like queen f3, preventing me from playing c5, it leaves me with this very, very bad bishop on b7, and I'm groveling. I am struggling to make a draw here, and there are going to be no chances of me winning the game. So as such, I decided instead to play queen e7. We get rook to c1, and now I play this move knight b8, again, eschewing the possibility of trying to play one of these unpleasant endgames with a bad bishop on b7. So here I go knight b8, and now Narayanan starts trading off everything on d5, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, how bad can this really be? Because at the end of the day, material is even, the same, we have a symmetrical pawn structure. Feels like it shouldn't be that bad. But boy, oh boy, did I miscalculate this structure, because I'm actually in a lot of trouble here. So we get queen f5 played here, and now I play this move rook c8, which is a blunder. Initially, I wanted to play queen b7, guarding the rook on c8 here, but I thought that after, say, h4 here, or even a move like king g2, I didn't know what I was playing, because the move that I'd love to play, actually, after h4 specifically, is knight c6, because after takes queen d5, I can sack the queen, and in this position, black is probably able to draw the game with the two rooks versus the queen. But the problem here is that after king g2, the knight c6 idea no longer works here to get rid of the bad horse, because after takes, white actually has two connected passed pawns. White is pushing the p on the queen side, and the rooks cannot stop the queen and the two pawns. So I thought after king g2, I wasn't even sure what to play here, and it just looked miserable, so I decided to play rook e8 instead. Now we get h4, which is another move that I really like from Narayanan. Now, it's interesting that Peter doesn't give white as big of an advantage as I felt that white had here. I actually thought at this point I was very close to losing simply because his knight on b8 is horribly placed. I can't bring it back into the game. And so his knight on e5 dominates the knight on b8. And without this knight in the game, I think I'm in serious trouble. So I play f6 here, and we get knight g4, which is a great move as well. I go queen d6, knight to e3, and now I play this move rook d8, which is a horrible, horrible move. What I should have played was this move knight to c6, and after queen d5 takes rook d8, takes, I'm down a pawn here, but maybe I can save the game and make a draw. Instead, I decide to play this move rook d8, guarding the pawn, and now Narayanan blunders with this move h5. Now, white is still much better here, but this is a horrible decision. What my opponent should have done here is play this move queen c2, which stops me from getting the knight to c6 here. Now, the knight on b8 still is a very, very poor piece here, and if I play a move like knight d7, for example, knight to f5 just wins on the spot. If I play queen e6, there's rook to e1. Queen has to go back to f7, and after rook e7, white creates the kebab and impales the meat on the 7th rank, and I lose the game, and I ruin my tournament. Additionally here, if I play a move like queen to d7, white can simply go h5 here, and after f5, knight g2, with the knight rerouting to f4, and these juicy squares on e6 potentially, as well as the weak pawn on d5, computer gives white a very, very big, or I thought a very big advantage, maybe not actually. I just noticed the bar went down. Now it wants queen c7 instead of knight g2. But nonetheless, it's very, very uncomfortable. And I thought that if Narayanan had played queen c2, I was losing the position. So he plays h5, which lets me go knight c6, and now at the very least, my knight gets back into the game. It's no longer stuck on this b8 square, and so I have some chances. Now, what Narayanan missed during the game is that he simply missed it after h6. I could play this move knight to e7, attacking the queen first. Because if I play g6 here, which is another logical move, after queen d5 takes, and rook c6, white is probably winning the endgame due to this cactus thorn pawn on h6 and this infiltration on the 7th rank. So, Narayanan simply missed it after h6. I could play knight e7, hitting the queen first, and then after g6, I'm very much in the game because the knight guards the pawn on d5. So he plays queen f3, I go knight to e7, guarding the pawn on d5 and stopping this knight f5 maneuver. We get rook e1, and now I play g6. Now, this is a very sort of sketchy choice to play g6, but I felt that at this point in the game, if I don't go g6, I'm simply getting squeezed on the king side. The reason is that long term, if I ever go h6 here, white can always play knight g2 and knight f4, and you'll notice that in this position after knight f4, the knight has g6 and e6 available. It also puts pressure on the pawn on d5, and it's a miserable, miserable position to play. So I don't want to play h6 here. But if I ever say move my rook, and then let's say we go queen d7, white always has h6, ruining my pawn structure on the king side again. And so because of these issues, I thought, you know what, I'm getting a little bit... I'm not super low on time, but I'm a little bit low on time. I know the moves are going to be difficult. I might as well play g6, and if I lose this position, I lose it, but at least I'll have some chances. So we get takes, knight g2, and here I blunder with queen d7. Now, the move that I should have played was g5. Now, the reason I didn't play g5 is I thought that in this position, after g5, white could play queen g4 here with the idea of f4 to go after this pawn on g5, combined with knight f4, knight e6 ideas, and it looks really scary. Now, the computer says after queen d7, rook to e6 here, I can play rook f7, rook to e1, and then I have this very unusual move, knight to c6, which apparently is kind of saving the game, or maybe I've got the wrong position. Rook e6. Oh, no, sorry. Rook e6, rook c8, rook e1, and I have this knight c6 move here, which somehow miraculously saves the game. Now, the reason I never could have calculated this is because here it feels like the knight needs to go to g6. My king is very naked here with just the 2 pawns in front of it, so it feels like the knight always needs to go and cover up the king. But computer says after knight c6 here, if white plays a move like knight h4, trying to jump with the horse here, I can sack the knight, and in this position after... Wait, no, maybe I can't. Oh, no, I've got knight d8 here, sorry. My analysis is a little bit off, obviously a little bit tired, but I have knight d8 hitting the rook on e6 here, and white is actually in a lot of trouble. But again, very, very hard to spot this over the board during the game. It's not easy, and all I saw was something like knight g6, for example. And after knight g6, there's knight e3, knight f5. There's also maybe f4 here, and my king is so weak here on the g file that it feels like it's power overwhelming for white. So I played queen d7 instead. We get knight f4 here, trying to go for knight e6, forking these rooks. But there are other ideas too, like say I play rook b8, for example. White can sack the rook here and create a fork with knight takes g6. So his knight on f4 is very scary. There are all these different fork ideas with the knight jumping every which way, and so I have to be very careful. So I play rook c8 here, trying to trade the rooks off. Now this is a blunder. Apparently I should have played the other order with rook f7, knight e6, and then rook c8. So instead I go rook c8, we get rook d1, which is a blunder. Rook takes c8 apparently is winning, so after takes, a knight to e6 here. If I play the move knight f5, which was one of my ideas here, there's g4, knight to g7, and white does not take the pawn on f6, so after takes and rook e8, black is actually winning the game due to this pin. But white can simply go knight f4, hitting both the pawns on g6 and f4, and it's GG on the spot. Additionally, if I play the move king to f7 here to guard the pawn on f6, white can now go queen to h1, infiltrating on the h file. And after knight f5, queen h7, knight g7, this just loses. What am I saying? This just loses. Sorry, I'm insane. I thought I could block on g7. But I can go king g8, but after queen to h6 here with queen g7, checkmate incoming, white is simply winning once again. So here we get to move rook c d1, which is a mistake, and now I play rook f7, and we get to move rook d2, which is also a mistake. Here, what Narayanan should have played in this position is he probably should have played this move, this move rook to d3, going for the stack, and the reason is actually somewhat counterintuitive. Now if I play queen f5 and white goes rook to e3, you'll notice that the queen on f3 is guarded in this position, whereas in the other line, after rook to d2, if I play queen f5 and rook e2, again, I can play this move knight to c6. And now the threats with g5, d4 is also very weak here. And white is actually not all that much better. Now, I think what I actually saw during the game when I considered this briefly was I saw g4 takes rook e8. And I did not actually see this move rook to f8. I only saw takes. And if I play rook f8 here, white swaps and has the tickle check with queen a3 and then wins my queen and wins the game. And if I play the move king g7 here, I believe white has queen h3 with the idea of queen to h8 checkmate, and I will once again lose this queen or get checkmated on the h8 square. So instead I play g5, which is a mistake. We get knight to e6. Now I play knight g6 here. I've got to trade off this great knight on e6. If I can trade off the knight here, I feel like maybe I have some chances to survive in this position, because now my king side is very compact. The king guards a pawn, pawns guard each other, rook on f7 guards f6, and maybe I can go rook h8 and create some counterplay on the h file. So we get queen to a3 here, which is a big mistake from Narayanan. Now, again, we're getting a little bit low on time. I think for Narayanan, who had been pressing the whole game, he starts to feel like, where is the win? It feels like more and more pieces are coming off the board, and with more and more pieces coming off the board, the closer and closer we get to the game ending in a draw. So he plays queen a3, which is a mistake, but now I play rook h8 very quickly. The computer actually says that I can play rook c1 here, trying to trade off a set of the rooks. It's a very weird concept. If rook e2, I will basically just go back and forth between the two squares. And essentially, if we ever get a position like this, where it's just a queen and a rook on the board, white can never win. White needs to keep both of these rooks and the queen on the board to ever have attacking possibilities. So I missed this, and instead I play rook h8, which I thought was a very logical move here, except rook e7. Now I play queen h3, and we reach the classic call the ambulance, but not for me situation. And I thought, well, open file. Let's put the rook on the open file here. And now we get king g1. Now, computer says that after queen f3 here in this position, let's say I play like queen d8, queen to f5. In this position, after queen g8, apparently white is winning after this move rook 1 to e5 with a big attack on the f and g files. But again, very difficult to find. So Narayanan instead plays king g1, which now lets me play queen c8. Now I have ideas like queen g8 and queen h7 to create the double stack on the file. I also can maybe infiltrate on the c file or go queen h3. And here Narayanan decides to give up any chance of winning this game and potentially a tournament by playing this move rook to e7 and offering me a draw. Now, considering how much pressure I was under during this entire game, I was very glad to take the draw immediately because I was very, very close to losing. So what does that mean? With this draw, it means that I finish a half point out of first place. Now, it's unclear who's going to win the tournament. There's a tiebreaker yet to be decided, being played between Noterbek and Noterbek Yakubov and Noterbek Abdusarov, respectively, since Noterbek Abdusarov won a huge game against Arjun Erigaisi when Arjun blundered a rook in a dead drawn position. So we don't know who's going to win. Nonetheless, I will finish a half point out of first place, but I only lose 2 rating points, so I'm still in the hunt to get that rating slot after the Isle of Man tournament concludes in 2 weeks. Tough tournament for me. Overall, pretty good. I would have liked to have won one more game, the game specifically against David Pravian in round number 6, I believe it was. But otherwise, I can't really complain. So I'm pretty happy with the result. Sure, I lose a few rating points, but I played some very interesting chess, and I did not set myself on fire and lose a bunch of rating points like Magnus did, for example. So it is what it is. solid tournament, not great, not horrible, and we move on now. I will be traveling to the Isle of Man later tonight to compete in the Grand Swiss, which starts in a couple of days. So we will be recapping from there once the tournament starts, I believe on Wednesday or Thursday. But for now, that's all here from Doha, Qatar with the Qatar Masters Open. Once again, I hope you guys enjoyed all of our recaps throughout this tournament. Make sure to smash that subscribe button below if you haven't already. And I will be back with more recaps once the Grand Swiss starts in Isle of Man in a couple of days. See you guys. Bye.